followers don't mean anything. Followers doesn't equal cash in your bank.
My guest today is leadership and management expert Heather Elkington.
Happy employees means profitable company. Hire people on those values, fire people on those values as well.
At just 28 years old, Heather has helped build and sell a business for multi-million pounds and has been a director for a FTSE 100 company.
I remember calling it on this PDF, Kill the King.
If I saw that from my team, I'd be getting a heart attack. She took a big risk and left that role to set up In the Making, the refreshing and practical leadership guide for smashing your first-time management role.
No one has got a clue what to do with like remote work, flexibility. What should the guidelines be? How do I keep my team happy? How do I focus on well-being? I had to figure those things out.
Heather helps turn new managers into high-performing leaders. How would you motivate those people?
Always just go back to progression.
What's the most common mistake that first-time managers make?
The most common mistake first-time managers make is...
Welcome to Unboxed. I'm your host, Connie Nam, the founder of Astrid and Miyu. In these conversations, I speak to founders, investors, and creators who are all breaking boundaries in their space to discover the person behind the brand and what it took for them to build their empires. Hi, Heather. How are you?
I am great, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. So good to see you in person because
Yes.
I'm obsessed with your videos. So it's so weird to see you in person because I feel like I know you already.
Thank you. For me, this is a bit of a surreal moment because, as I was saying, Astrid and Miyu is a brand that for birthdays, Christmas presents, me and my friends would all gift each other little Astrid and Miyu
that's so
trinkets. So
sweet.
yeah, it's very special for me to be here.
I sort of know the summary of your journey, but for our listeners, would you briefly tell everyone about yourself, how you've built your platform, why, what you've done before, because you were also a very successful businesswoman before then.
Yeah, of course. So I got kind of thrown into my very first management role. I was 21 years old. I was managing a team of 8 people at Harrods, so one of the, if not the busiest department stores in the entire world. And everyone always asks me at this point, like, how do you get an assistant manager job at Harrods when you've got no experience? And I did have experience because while I was at uni, I was working supervisor roles in retail shops, assistant manager roles in bars, shop floors, just kind of little things here and there, all of which added management experience onto my CV. So by the time I got to Harrods, I kind of thought I was ready, but got completely thrown in at the deep end.
So were you hired as assistant manager?
Yes, hired straight in as assistant manager. It was a little boutique on the chocolate floor. And like most managers, had no training. Like, it was just a case of F around and find out. And
Had you managed people before? Sort of-ish.
like, not really. I'd been, for anyone who's been maybe like an assistant manager or a supervisor on a shop floor, it's a very different world to corporate because you're managing shift patterns, you're managing people, not always, that is not always their forever job.
Yeah.
And so it was, even for me while I was at university, for me it was just a bit of a stepping stone, and I probably like didn't put as much into it as I should have. So Harrods, 21 years old, managing 8 people with almost no idea what I was doing. I remember the first time I felt like wild imposter syndrome was one of the women on shift. She was a lot older than me, I guess at least 10 years older than me. She was consistently coming in late, and for shift workers it's really harsh because it impacts everyone else in the team. She was coming in really late every day, and I needed to say something. But I just put it off, and I just put it off, and I just ignored every level of confrontation possible for an easy life.
Sounds very familiar.
Yeah, exactly. But fast forward a month, 2 months, and this small problem that could have just been solved by having a conversation to make her aware of the fact that when she's coming in late, it's harming the rest of the team, she needs to sort it out, or a job is going to be at risk. It turned into something so much bigger. The entire team gossiped. Everyone felt really demotivated because they were having to work extra to fill in for this person not coming in on time. And it was like the first time I ever looked at my managerial responsibility and the decisions that I'd made and thought, you have messed up so much here. Something that could have been so quick and small and easy has now turned into a massive problem. I went and had the conversation with her on the shop floor, and I was nervous. I was like hands shaking, really worried about what she was going to say. And I think as well, people who are quite assertive, you confuse that with aggression, and you think that just because someone is quite assertive and like knows themselves well and can speak well, it can make you think, oh, I daren't say anything to them in case they have a clever comeback, or when actually something still needs to be said. So I just went and had the conversation, and honestly, it was all fine. She just was like, I'm sorry, I didn't even realise. Something to do with, I can't remember fully, but something to do with like the buses, different times, and she just didn't realise how much of an impact it was having on the team, and it was all solved so quickly.
And how did you approach that conversation? What did you say specifically?
Honestly, I was so nervous, I can't remember exactly what I said, but all I remember is just thinking in my head, just get it over with. Say the words that need to be said, say the words that need to be heard, and it will be over. Like, it was just get it out. That's the feeling of courage, really, I think, is kind of acting even though you know how fearful you are. I really didn't enjoy that job. I worked in it for 8 months, then moved into SaaS, so software as a service, which was my first real introduction into the tech world, and I worked as an EA. If anyone listening to this is at the beginning of a career, maybe they want to be a business owner but aren't really sure how it works or if it's right for them, I would highly recommend you just go and be an EA, a PA, or someone's right-hand man or woman, because it is a job that will just show you everything that goes on behind the scenes.
Take notes.
Yeah, so exactly. So we've got Connie's PA, is that right? Yeah, sat next to us, yeah.
And actually,
she's nodding along.
Our CMO, Sarah, she's joined me as my assistant 11 years ago, and she's learned everything, and she's done everything, and she's now our CMO.
Oh, yeah. The learning will just be like 10x because you are next to a founder or next to a CEO. So I'd highly recommend anyone go and get a job like that. I did that job just for about a year. It was a tech startup in the music industry, so it was quite full on. There was lots of late nights, lots of drinking. It got a bit much for me. So a year later, I left and moved up to Manchester because my partner at the time had got a job up north, and started working in a tiny, tiny, tiny startup called Go Proposal. I was a second member of staff. I didn't even really have a role title. Like, anyone who's worked in startup world will know that roles don't really exist at the beginning. It's just like, what can you do? How can you help? Let's get as many of your skills put to good use as possible. So that was me and 2 other people. And we just, figured it out. And over the course of 5 years, that role moved from being something that was kind of like marketing executive through to marketing manager, through to a director of a marketing team, and then right through to the role of operations director, which was the leader of the entire team, really. It was just one report down from our CEO and founder.
Wow, that's incredible, because marketing and operations are also completely different.
Exactly.
So you're straddling between the two, kind of like 2 different kinds of brain.
100%. What happened was we needed an ops director in the business. And James, the founder, was trying to figure out whether to hire someone externally, bring someone in who was like 10 steps ahead and just bring them in for a really high cost to just, get the business up to where it needed to be, versus promoting one of us internally. And there was a couple of us up for the job. It wasn't just me.
And how many of you were there at that?
At this time, we weren't even that huge. I'd say we were like 12 to 15 people when this first happened. And so it was between external or internal. He interviewed people externally. But we always had this value of like, and I, again, would recommend any founder or early stage startup people to do this value of like just human over experience and skills. And we really had figured that out in the hardest but best way, in that we'd brought people into the business who had almost no experience, almost no skills, no training, no prior learning, but just through a values-driven culture and like making people feel safe and heard, they can be anything. You give them a free runway.
No, I completely agree.
Yeah. So eventually I went through a hefty round of interviews with certain different people, external and internal, and got the job of ops director. I was in that job for, I want to say, about a year before we decided it was time to sell the business. One of the most important parts of selling Go Proposal to Sage was that the business wasn't hinged on the founder. So our founder, he was the face of the business. We would use like lots of personal branding, short form content, long form content. He would go on stage, speaking gigs, and he would do all the training videos. But we knew that if we were going to sell a business with a founder who was like a key person that the entire business was dependable on, it would be way less valuable, because you've got one piece of the puzzle, you remove it and the business can no longer stand up. So we went through a process of ensuring that even though James was the face and we did use him for marketing, that he was completely removed from every single thing operationally. And we got to the point, so that was basically my job. I remember writing up this.
Wow. Did that mean that you were sort of running the business at that point?
100%, yeah. And
That's
like,
crazy.
Yeah, 100%. It was great. It was like it just worked so perfectly well because James wanted to be removed, as I can imagine any founder does. They don't want to be like in the day-to-day doing of the business all the time. I wrote up this plan. I remember it being like a 5-page long PDF, and it was different chapters of what I was going to take the business through. And it was like, first of all, we have to remove the training of the product away from James. So we have to get the entire success team, being the people who are the face of the knowledge base of our product. And then it was, we need to remove the marketing. And it was the operational marketing. That was a hard one because marketing was James's craft. And he really wanted to hold on to it.
And he was the sales and marketing person.
Yeah,
at that point.
I mean, he was everything at one point. But yeah, he was so good at sales and marketing. It was really hard to move things away. And I think as a founder, you can always say, no one can do it as good as I can. But what James was really good at was like saying, that might be true, but I can't do everything. And so all I need to find is someone who can do it to 80% of what I can, but they can do it 10 times more, like in quantity. So we removed the marketing, went through this entire process. And the last stage, I remember calling it on this PDF, Kill the King. That was what I called this chapter. And it was like, we need to fully remove him from every corner. I know.
If I saw that from my team, I'd be getting a heart attack.
But he wanted it. Like it was all part of the process. It was all part of the, how do we sell this business? And he still owned it. Like we weren't actually killing him. But it was just removing him entirely from the day-to-day operations.
So what was his role at that point then?
Still founder and CEO.
Okay, so he's like in charge of running the business, not like specific departments.
Yeah.
Is that what it was?
It was more like he was great at like servant leadership, which is he could be whatever we needed from him. So if we needed him to be on stage, we would go and pitch to events, we would book him in, we'd get the payment, we would tell him what he needed to talk about, but he would turn up on the day. But everything else was manufactured by his team.
Yeah.
So he could just be in the best headspace possible to be on that stage. When we needed to sell our product into like huge corporate clients where the deals were like 6-figure deals, we needed James to go and be like the final closer for that deal. But everything else was done by our success and sales team, but just set up to the point where James could just come in and be the most valuable version of himself. We bring him in for like a very high level marketing and brand direction. But yeah, so we sold Go Proposal the sale went through in October 2021. And as a result of that sale, I moved from operations director in quite a small startup straight into an operations director in a corporate company with 11,000 employees across the entire globe, managing 5 different teams, still within our Go Proposal unit, but we kind of worked within like a bigger UK team of different products. So my job just went from small business into the corporate world.
Oh, wow.
Very quickly.
What was that shift like?
It was easy in some sense because we had a great team around us at Sage. And like all the people we'd partnered with within the organization were incredible. But when you add tens of thousands of people into the equation, things are so much harder to change. So if you ever want to make like a culture shift or change a process or just, I don't know, impact anything, it's a lot harder to do it in a corporate organization.
And presumably you joined this company because you love the small company culture, and now you're plugged into a big company culture, which I guess already had an existing culture that's different from this. Like, was
Yeah.
that a struggle? Was that completely like different and difficult?
Again, yes and no, which is not a very helpful answer, but the thing that I loved most about my work was that I had freedom, that I could be creative, that I could impact people, lead them well. My favorite part of my job was offering people jobs. So like when we went through the hiring process, got to the end and we'd call people up and give them a job, I'd always cry. It felt like a golden buzzer moment because I knew we were bringing them into a culture that we could just like grow someone. We give someone an opportunity, and I was like, oh, I'm so excited to just give you everything, give you a huge runway to take off as high as you want to. And moving into corporate, that didn't change. We still could create those amazing experiences for our team, for our clients, for new recruits. And so parts of my job that I loved, I still got to keep. So just going back to my journey and how on earth I'm now self-employed and how I got here. So back in late 2022, we did these surveys across corporate, and a lot of businesses will do these where you kind of do like an anonymous culture check across your team. So you'll ask them anonymous questions, and every manager in the organization will get feedback. This is what you're really great at. This is what your team is struggling with. And we'd done this huge organization-wide survey, and it came back that my results were some of the best in the whole organization for leadership, for like feedback, authenticity, transparency. And I started to get asked by like the learning development directors, can you do a workshop for this set of senior leaders on how you're leading your team, what you're doing that's so different? And I'm sat there like, I don't know. What am I doing that's
And
so
you
different?
kind of done this naturally because you haven't had
Exactly.
much guidance. You're just trying to figure it out yourself.
Exactly. But I'm like, no, come on, Heather, we can create a workshop out of this. So just started writing things down. I started posting on LinkedIn. I started putting things in a Word document, which I still have that Word document because I was like, this is going to be a book someday. Just putting all these learnings into one place so that I could actually teach them to other people. And just the feedback that I get from these workshops, and like I used to do training as well with people in like the leader aspiration program, so people who are working their way up and really showing promise to be great leaders in the future. And the feedback was just like, wow, this is so unique. We've never seen anything like this before. This is incredible. Can you do it? And I got asked to do talks on stage at conferences, at like internal events.
What was so unique about it versus, I guess, traditional learning and development?
Yeah, so the things I was teaching about leadership were very much coming, first of all, from a person who hasn't actually got that many years of experience.
How old were you at that point?
26, maybe?
Yeah, really young.
Yeah.
Most people are at like very early stage of their careers at that point, right?
Exactly. And I still was. I still felt like I was. But it was, I think it was the growth that I'd had. And like I said, with the EA roles, when you're next to a CEO or a founder, you have to learn so fast. Like you have no option but to just learn. And so I think I probably managed to squeeze 20 years of learning into 5 or 6 years. And yeah, so the uniqueness was the learnings were being presented by someone who, especially the junior managers, could really resonate to, because my experience had been in the last 5 years, and I was very close in age to them and very close in experience to them. So they could really resonate with what I was saying. But also, it was learnings that were very relevant, because at this time, we're talking 2021, 2022, 2023, we're still, even today, no one has got a clue what to do with like remote work, flexibility. What should the guidelines be? How do I keep my team happy? How do I focus on well-being? We're more tuned in than ever to DEI, but managers don't actually have the tools to make any change and help with it. And everything that I was teaching was just, I had to figure those things out. Like I had no choice. It was either figure these things out or your startup doesn't work.
And how do you figure those things out? Like, do you take inspiration from different sources? Because obviously, like a lot of people take inspiration from your platform, but where do you take inspiration?
I am an obsessive learner, like obsessive. This is really geeky, but I loved school just because I was like, learn. And I remember when school was coming to an end, like at the end of sixth form, thinking, oh my God, what if I never get to learn again? What if I felt like my life, at the end of my like formal education journey, I remember thinking life was coming to an end, because I was like, but how am I going to ever learn about history again? Who's going to teach me? So I've always been an obsessive learner. I've just been traveling for 6 months around the world, and we had to get on loads of different planes, and I just became obsessed with planes. I was like, right now, I can't get on a plane without knowing exactly what every single noise is. What's the pilot's name today? What plane is it that we're flying? Why does it have to be this plane? How much fuel do we need?
That is quite obsessive.
It is. When I was engulfed in this leadership world and feeling as though I had to know everything, which I now know I don't, but feeling as though I had to know everything, all I could turn to was learn. Like one of the most impactful books I've ever read is called No Rules Rules by Reed Hastings. He's the founder of Netflix.
LinkedIn.
One of the co-founders of Netflix. He talks about how Netflix actually had a make or break point about 10 years ago where the company almost went bust. It almost didn't become what we know today as Netflix. And the only way they managed to move the needle and take it to make away from break was because of the work that Reed and his team did with culture. And they just revolutionized what culture looked like in an organization. So they opened the books, meaning all of the financial information across the whole company was available. And it got their team thinking and acting like entrepreneurs. The concept of this was like, if you don't treat your team like entrepreneurs, you can't expect them to act like entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I remember a Netflix culture book that was
Yeah,
like the Bible.
big red one.
Yes.
Yeah. That's it. And so I just became obsessed with learning about companies and cultures and how culture and people has such a huge impact on an organization. It isn't, you have to have a great product, yes, you have to have great marketing. But if your culture in the back end is awful, your team are going to leave, the word is going to eventually get out about how unreliable you are as a company, how awful it is to work there. It happened with Uber not long ago, and Uber have turned it around now. They brought in some really high-ticket culture consultants, but Uber went through a serious, troubling culture period that almost broke how everyone viewed Uber as a platform. And just became obsessed with learning in every single aspect and still am.
And when did you make that jump into being a full-time content creator? Did you start this in the background while you had your full-time job?
Yes, but only very briefly. So, full transparency, I got a payout from the company when we sold the company to Sage. Before then, until 3 years ago, I was skint. I was a skint uni student. I didn't have big salaries until just a few short years ago. I was never someone who ever thought I would have a period in my life where I could take big risks with my career or I could go traveling, for example. That was just never on the card for me. And then we sold the company. I had a big payout as a result of that. Not an amount that I can never work again, but an amount that makes me feel comfortable that I can take some risks for a few years and I know the mortgage is paid. And so probably in about May 2023, I started to have this feeling that there was something more that I needed to do. And it came from doing these workshops and teachings within the corporate that I worked at. And just thinking imagine if I could get these teachings to everyone in the managerial corporate world, how much of a difference we can make. So many people are miserable in their work. So many people are dreading, anxious on a Sunday evening and really hate the drive to work. I know this now because I get voice notes, I get upset messages every single day on Instagram from people across the world who hate their job, are anxious, stressed, feel just so much negativity towards their job. And it makes no sense. There is absolutely no reason for people to feel like that because happy employees means profitable company. It's 100%. You can keep your employees fulfilled, challenged, growing, happy. Your business will succeed more as a result. So why are we still reliant upon old management and principles you need to work 9 to 5, you need to be in an office, all the old leadership principles? Why do we still rely on them when you are doing it at detriment to your company? And so I started to just feel as though there was something bigger that I needed to tackle, something bigger than me, something that I couldn't do within one corporate organization, but it needed to be at scale. And I just started testing the waters. I started posting on TikTok. I was really embarrassed. I remember the first time that I found out my ex had seen one because my friend had told me, seen one of my TikToks, and I was thinking, oh, I hate my life. This is the most embarrassing thing ever.
How do you get over that hurdle?
Oh, I don't think you do.
Do you still feel embarrassed after you post things?
Sometimes. I wouldn't say embarrass is the right word, but sometimes I will watch a video of mine and think, oh, I can't watch that. And I'm but you just have to know that it's too important to care.
Yeah,
Do you
it's
know what I
making
mean?
a huge impact.
Exactly.
I watch your videos and I wish I had this resource 12 years ago when I first started business, or even 7 years ago.
Oh, amazing. That's
Yeah, it's
that's
incredible.
Really great.
So I guess observing your audience, what's the most common mistake that first-time managers make?
The most common mistake first-time managers make is assuming you have to be perfect instead of just focusing on growing. So managers win when they adopt a growth over perfection mindset. What that means is, in a situation where you are unsure what the right thing to say is, you are unsure if it's time for your opinion to be heard, you're unsure whether you need to go in this direction or this direction with your team, instead of focusing on have to make the right decision, focus on how do we grow? So ask more questions, make more mistakes, be okay with making mistakes. Ask people questions to figure out what it is they need you to say instead of thinking you always have to have the right thing to say. The biggest mistake is definitely people assuming that they have to be perfect and that they always have to have the answer, which is completely not true. We trust people way more who say, I don't know, than people who seem to have all the answers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you touch upon imposter syndrome briefly, and I'm sure like when you were 21 assistant manager at Harrods, speaking to that person who was 10 years older than you, hesitating was because of imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
And like this is what a lot of first-time managers or founders face. How do you overcome that? I'm assuming you've overcome this now.
Again, I wouldn't say overcome, but definitely just know how to work with it a lot better. When I feel imposter syndrome start to bubble up, and it usually bubbles up when I doubt myself or I think, why on earth am I in this room? I'll tell you, an example is today, seeing the founder of Never Fully Dressed sat here before I got in and thinking, oh my, why am I the next guest? Like, it's when you question, why do I deserve to be in this room? And you really doubt yourself. Usually the thing that you think you lack, so whether that's experience, whether it's money, years in the game, the size of your company, the following on social media, whatever it is you think you lack, that is usually where your superpower is. So for me at Harrods, it was the fact that I was young and inexperienced. For me, when I was at Sage, it was the fact that I was young and inexperienced. But actually, when I was in rooms with people 10, 20, 30 years older than me, they needed someone who hadn't been in the game for very long. They needed someone to help them to see like a different way of doing business, managing in a different way, in a unique way. And I just started to rewire things in my head to say, these aren't weaknesses, these are actually the biggest strengths and the exact reason why you're here. I also like to remind myself that the universe will never give you a challenge that you can't overcome. And if you weren't ready, the opportunity would have never presented itself in the first place. And so I quite often just say those things over and over again in my head. And I wouldn't say get nervous when I go on stage or do any sort of public speaking gig, but I still definitely feel something. Like there's always a bit of tingling thinking, what if I don't say the right thing? What if I mess up my words? But you have to switch the focus to, may I say the right words today that will help someone? And when you do that, everything that you feel will just go. And it doesn't matter and it's not important anymore. It's important you feel those things and you allow yourself to feel them, but ultimately it's not why we're here. I don't think I've overcome imposter syndrome. I don't think I ever will, but I've just learned how to work with it. And my growth on social media has been really quick. Like, I wish I'd built it more sustainably so that I could learn at different phases.
What is unsustainable about it now?
So when you have no followers or 10 followers, 20 followers, you can fail and no one sees. You can make mistakes and no one sees and no one cares. When you have 100,000 followers, you become very aware that if you make a mistake, 100,000 people will be the viewers of that mistake. And so I sometimes wish, and this is advice I would give to anyone if they were focused on growing a platform or like two heads down in metrics and engagement, is every stage there is like beauty in that phase that you have right there. So I remember when I hit 10,000 followers, and for me it was like I now had an audience that felt substantial and would answer my questions. Like I could do customer research. They would DM me if I asked a question. They would answer those little question stickers and things. But then that very quickly turned into like 80,000, 90,000. And all of a sudden I was like, shit, I don't know what questions to ask them anymore. I don't know, who are these people? Where have they come from? Are they in corporate? Are they in small business? I knew what I was doing. I was creating viral videos for quick likes. And it was very much manufactured to be that way. And if I could go back 6 months ago, I would say build deep in the community first and then just sprinkle a bit of virality in, like every now and again. I'm now having to reverse engineer, like getting to know my customers, getting to know the people that follow me. I've barely met anyone. I'm starting to now like offer to the paid members of my newsletter, just starting to offer like 30-minute slots to them just to get to know them.
Was there an event when you felt like a failure because it grew so quickly? Because it sounds to me like a really great problem.
It is.
I mean, like a lot of
it's a
content
great
creators
problem.
would die to be in this place, right?
It is a great problem, but what you have to remember is followers don't mean anything. They mean absolutely nothing. Unless the only way you want to make money is by brand deals. Even then, are more reliant upon engagement than actual followers. Followers doesn't equal cash in your bank. It doesn't equal able to make more impact, because if those people then aren't seeing repeat videos because they just came to you from a viral video and they don't actually care about you, you just reach 10 million people and 10,000 of them happen to click follow, it doesn't actually matter. And so it is a great problem to have, but I definitely would go back to, 10,000 followers, leadership ever, and be like, we don't need virality. What you need is to get to know these people, know what drives them, know what they want from you, what could be really helpful for them, how can you serve them best. And yeah, I'm just having to reverse engineer that. And it, like I said, it's a great problem to have, but I tell you when it does not work out. I ran a event, like a live online workshop, and I was convinced, it's £25 a ticket, and I was like, it was launch day, and I was like, I'm gonna sell hundreds on launch day. Of course I am. People are clicking through to it. People are excited. Launch day comes, put the tickets live, and I think I sold 8 tickets on day one. That was when I had a platform of 100,000 people. This was a few months ago. And I'm like, what have I possibly done wrong? I was really upset with myself. The key was, the thing I did wrong that I will never do again, was I hadn't understood what people actually wanted from me. So my event was focused on delivering difficult conversations with kindness to your team. And I knew that's what managers need to hear. I was like, you need to hear this education, it's really important. And I'd done like a performance management spreadsheet. When I didn't sell that many tickets on launch day, I was like, what have I done wrong? What note am I not hitting? When I went and asked questions, and I just do it really simply by like sending out emails to my newsletter or asking the Instagram sticker box, what is it that troubles you about difficult conversations? The actual problem people had was they were scared they were going to say the wrong thing. They were worried that, like, even cancel culture, that they were going to have a HR complaint if they were to step over the line saying something to an employee. So I was like, that's what the event needs to be on. It's not necessarily difficult conversations. It's how does the manager approach that conversation to essentially stop them having any sort of complaint, or like they can feel really confident in having difficult conversations with their team. So I just reworded things in the event. I just reworded lots of the key sales points, because that was always what the message was going to be. I just hadn't worded it properly. Changed everything up, and we sold hundreds of tickets in the end, but it just wasn't on.
That's incredible.
It wasn't
so
on launch day.
It's like the same thing.
So
it?
nuanced. If I was to give one piece of advice to anyone starting a business from scratch, the thing I would spend my most time and money on and energy on would be getting to know exactly what it is your customers are scared about, what they dream about, where they want to be in 3 years' time, and then figuring out how you can help them get there, and using their exact words, the exact words they say to you. When you ask the question, what is your biggest struggle right now? They respond, not being respected by my seniors. They are the exact words you want to use for a newsletter subject, you want to use on the social media post, on the next time you try and sell a course or a product. You have to use those exact words because they see themselves in that story.
That's very interesting. Motivating your team is the most important thing a founder can do. Do you have some tips and tools?
So there is only one way that you can truly, truly, truly keep your team happy. And that is if they are progressing in something. It might be salary, it might be skills, it might be in the way they feel, their mental health, how comfortable they feel at work. But they have to be progressing in something. And so when I have a demotivated team, whether I'm coaching the leader of that team or like in a workplace and the team are just completely disengaged, I will go to the most disengaged person first and just be like, what is it that you're progressing in at work? And usually, salary is the first one that comes to mind. They haven't had a salary raise for a long time. But if they have, their role hasn't changed for a long time. So they've been doing the same thing day in, day out for the past 2 or 3 years. Or they feel as though the way they feel about work, so their mental health, their anxiety, their stress, is actually deteriorating instead of getting better. So when you are leading a team and you feel as though they're disengaged, just go around and figure out what it is about each individual person that needs to progress. It could be their salary. That's one of the easier ones. But if it can't be salary, if you've got, I don't know, budget constraints or whatever, how do you progress their skills? What is it that drives them, and how can you help them get closer to that? Yeah, there's some extra like learning that they can do if they want to move department or move into a different skill set, or take sometimes people even want to take more on and they just haven't had the opportunity yet to show what they're great at. So if a team are demotivated, you need to go back to progression principles, forward motion, and just think, how can we get everyone slightly moving forward? Even if it's just the same processes that they are running day in, day out, how can we improve that process to make it slicker, more automated, more efficient?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think we were always in a fortunate position because we're growing every year and year. So like every single person has that opportunity. But I guess like in certain environments like retail, it's quite difficult because you have a clear hierarchy. How would you, I guess, motivate a sales assistant who might not necessarily be committed to being in retail forever? They might be a student. So this is kind of a stepping stone, kind of like how you treated it when you were a student. How would you motivate those people?
Even if a retail career isn't their forever career, there will still be skills about that specific job that really interest them, that they're really good at. And just think, how can you grow them? Like, could you put them on some exciting sales training that gets them fired up with someone that's really relatable to them? Or get them with like a cool brand owner who is just a few steps ahead further than that company, but you can get them learning from that next person. Like, there could also be opportunities on the sales floor, like get them involved in improving processes. They're the ones closest to the problems. So you could ask questions like, how do you think we could make this sales process more efficient? How do you think we can make the cleaning process more efficient? How do you think we can excite people more the moment they step into this shop? Like, what do you think we could just do to add a sparkle into that experience? And all of a sudden people are fired up and useful and helpful, but not everyone will be. You just have to find the thing that they are really great at. I worked in a supervisor job at Holland & Barrett while I was in my second year at university, maybe third year. And it was a tiny shop on Big Market in Newcastle, if anyone knows it. Tiny, tiny shop. But I am really, really passionate and good and love interior design. And there was something about the way this shop was laid out. And it was a brand that had brand guidelines and stuff, so you couldn't change that much. But we used to do events where the shops themselves would be given quite a lot of freedom and control over what the shop would look like on a certain day. And my manager would always just do it. He would just take it on. And I always used to think, oh, if you just asked me, I could do it so much better than you. I know exactly where to put that balloon arch. I could tell you exactly how to make that customer feel like they're part of this event. Yeah, again, if I could go back and tell myself what to do, I would say you just go and jump in and help. But as like a naive and scared, 18, 19-year-old, I just kind of sat back and watched. But I look back now and think, he could have just said to me, can you help? How do you want to get involved? You know, what are you really great at? What are your strengths? And I would have,
So asking your employees a lot of questions around their motivation.
100%, yeah.
And equally, a lot of our listeners are early stage founders. And I guess a lot of them are also first time managers, which I was 12 years ago. What advice would you give them in managing their first employee who kind of needs to do everything under the sun?
You can probably be a testament to this, but the first, I'm going to say 5 people you bring into your business will be the most important. Not necessarily with skills, although that is important, but with energy. Like, you're an early stage founder, you need people to be able to match your energy. And whilst if they don't own part of the company, they're never going to be as emotionally invested as you are. But that doesn't mean that they don't bring like the energy that's needed to get a startup off the ground. So those first, I'm going to say 5 people are really, 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 really important. Hire them based on values. If you don't already have values, go and find them. Your values will already exist in you. They are statements that lie deep within moments of inspiration, that lie within shower thoughts that you come up with, that lie within like the things you do behind people's back that are really integral to who you are as a person. So the way you speak about your friends when they're not there, the way you talk about your family when they're not there, the way you run your business when no one else is around on your worst days, how you show up is your values are somewhere within there. So go and find them and then hire people on those values, fire people on those values as well. And what I would say is when we first started really building a team within Go Proposal, we had a really important role to hire for, and it was the marketing manager, and it was someone who was going to come in and report to me. It was the marketing manager. It was one of the most important roles at the time because James, the founder, was a marketeer, and we needed someone who just their standards were really high. Our business was like marketing led, and we had to let go. We hired and let go of, I'm going to say 3 or 4 people in quite a short space of time. There was ways you can make it really ethical. So like we were aware that this was an us problem. We were hiring, you know, you may be letting one person go, it might be them, but when you end up letting 3 people go in a row, you're like, our standards are potentially way too high. So we would just pay them for a long time. So we'd say like, we are letting you go, but we're going to pay you for 3 months after your termination to make sure you can find another job. We would also take the blame. So be like, we've just really messed up.
I think it is incredibly difficult to hire
Yeah.
in a startup because you're trying to figure out like what the hell is going on. You're trying to figure out your values. You're trying to figure out what the plan is, everything. So you kind of need someone very particular,
Yeah.
right? But you haven't articulated that yet.
100%. And it's not until you get that person in and start working with them and really, hiring is always a risk. And I always find it strange when companies put like 10 steps in the hiring process because hiring will always be a risk and there is nothing you can do to fully mitigate it. So you can put 10 steps in place, but I just never know what it achieves. I'm like, you're just gonna get people, you're just gonna alienate people.
Well, you'll just get people who are very good in the process.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. They're very good at manufacturing the way they come across. Exactly. And so I always think just hire fast, like hire on gut instinct, but be very careful of bias because I hired on gut instinct for a long time before I'd educated myself on bias and ended up surrounded by people who looked like me and thought like me. And then you sit there one day and go, shit, we've just got a group of young white females who all think the same way I do. And I was like, right, I need to educate myself on this and change it because I'm going to have quite a big impact on the world. So it's important that I know what I'm doing. And when you become aware of bias, you see how really it shows up so much in the recruitment process. People always say to me, whenever I talk about bias in recruitment, they always go, and my dad has said this to me so many times, yeah, but I just hire the best person for the job. Just hire the best person for the job. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter where they come from. And I'm like, yeah, but Dad, you've put a job ad up where you've probably used lots of masculine words like leader and strong and empowering. And so you're going to alienate a lot of women. You're then probably going to put some sort of like educational requirement and you will alienate lots of people who haven't been born with the privilege of being able to go to university, who maybe have immigrant parents and, I don't know, struggled even to get into the schooling system in the first place. And then you get 5 white men sat in an interview room and you go, I'm going to just pick the best person for the job. But you've already alienated lots of incredible, diverse thinking people along the way.
So how do you mitigate that? Did you eventually hire people that are different from you?
Oh yeah, of course, 100%. And sometimes there's a couple of instances where we got to the last 2 people in the hiring process and one of them was like someone who looked like us, thought like us, let's just say a straight white man. And then someone else who was like a person of colour, maybe had much diverse, like a neurodivergent, different ways of thinking. Mm. And we got to these end 2 people. This was a very specific time. We got to these end 2 people. And the hiring manager who reported into me was like, I'm going to go with, called him Sam, the straight white man. And I was like, can you just tell me your thought process? Can you just like work it through with me? And he was like, I just feel like he's the safe choice, you know? I just feel like he's got the skills and he's got the energy and the personality. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about the skills. Where have the skills come from? It's like, university, okay. Let's talk about his energy. Why do you think he has a very different presence and confidence when he's in your presence as opposed to this person of colour? And you're like, yeah. And then you go, okay, now should we give this opportunity to? And it wasn't that this person, the person of colour, was any worse at the job. And in fact, they were brilliant when we hired them. It was just that unless you are really, really careful and educated on bias and have someone else who's willing to hold you accountable to those things and run you through the process when you go through recruiting, it's subconscious. It exists within all of us.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
people tend to go with people who they feel more comfortable with.
Exactly. I remember this is a great one as well. When I do like any sort of culture consulting or people consulting, I remember this one company specifically who had, as part of their like hiring manager kind of like intuition tests, was, would you go for a pint with them after work? Like, that's a good test of intuition. Obviously, that is not a good test of should you hire someone or not, because you end up then getting someone who, again, thinks, looks, acts like you and feels very confident in your presence. And so it was like, right, we're taking that off straight away, because actually when you get to a point, and I think this happens at some time around 15 members of staff, you get to a point where not everyone can be friends anymore, because you have such diversity of thought and experience. You ideally don't want everyone to be best friends. You need conflict in a healthy way, because you need people bringing different opinions to the table and calling people out and making sure we've considered all angles.
I also think there's a huge difference between values fit and culture fit, right? And I think a lot of people misunderstand culture fit for values fit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ultimately, you need to dig deep down to see what they stand for rather than what they look like or how they appear.
That's it. If you have those values, it gets really easy to get rid of every other specification of a human being and just go, but what is inside their heart and in their mind? And that's how we'll hire them, and that's what we decide.
And in practice, how do you filter that down to the team? Would you suggest a framework for leaders to combat those biases?
I just went back to education. So we paid for speakers to come into the workplace to educate our team on bias and diversity of thinking. It was just all education. It was just investing, putting our money where our mouth was, and investing time and money into making sure the people who had decision-making power were very much aware of the weight that their decision holds and how they need to take things like that very seriously. This has probably happened like 5 times in my life, where someone has got almost frustrated with how non-tolerant I am when bias comes to play. And people have said to me quite often, like, oh, but it's just so hard to be like politically correct all the time. I'm like, but it's not when you've done the work. Like, it's not hard at all when you have invested time and energy and money from companies where needed into just educating yourself and becoming aware of people's stories and the way why the world is how it is, why capitalism is how it is, how the West is dominant. Like, when you understand how those things all came to play, it's not hard.
Are there studies around whether diverse teams are actually more productive and effective?
Yes, absolutely. So there was an amazing one in Harvard Business Review by an incredible woman called Frances Fry. Go look up the article. It's all about authenticity and leadership. And there's a specific section. It talks about, I think she calls them homogenous teams and teams that have diversity of opinion. And she talks about how homogenous teams will have less failure, so they will get to places faster because everyone is like thinking in the same way, moving really fast in the same direction. But with teams that have diversity of thought, they might be slower and more patient and a bit more like slow off the ground, but will massively outlast the other teams because they will fail along the way, they will consider different opinions, and they'll go further instead of going faster and then kind of slowing down when they get to a certain point.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, definitely do.
Finally, what advice would you give an early stage leader?
There's a great Tim Ferriss quote, which is, your success in life will be directly proportional to the amount of uncomfortable conversations you are willing to have. And when you are first in those leadership positions, whether it's you're running your own business or you're in a huge corporate company and you feel like you're just a tiny cog in the machine, you will outrun 80% of people around you just by being the person who is willing to have uncomfortable conversations. Because so many leaders will just put things off. They want to avoid conflict, don't we all? Like, nobody likes conflict. But yeah, you can solve probably 80% of your problems simply by being the person who is willing to have the conversations that no one else is willing to have. And when something comes up that feels uncomfortable, whether it's gossip, drama, someone does something in their performance that you're unhappy with, just speak to them. It doesn't need to be perfect. You don't need to have the answer. Just have the conversation.
I need to amplify this to my internal chat, to the entire company. Thank you so much, Heather. That was so inspiring and so fun.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. You can follow me at Connie Nam, Astrid and Miyu at Astrid and Miyu, and the Unboxed Instagram page at unboxed_founder confidential. See you next week.